tell me who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Felicia Graber, and I was born in Poland, town of Poland. I'm a retired Parkway North high school teacher, taught French and German, and I have 2 children, 8 grandchildren, and I'm a docent, I'm a speaker at the Holocaust Museum Learning Center. I guess that's about it.
Tell me why you speak, Felicia.
Oh, that is a very good question. Until about 1996, I would not have done that. When I first went to Poland.
Well, and tell me, you're not going to know that. So when you speak to me, I'm going to use whole sentences.
Okay.
To say, until then, I wouldn't have spoken
okay.
at the museum like I do now.
Okay. Until then, I would not have spoken at the museum like I'm doing now. It was something that was just, well,
that's what's good about doing this. So we can start all
over again. Okay.
Yeah,
it's not a one-day
show. Take your time and think about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, as I was raising my family, the Holocaust was very far removed from my mind. I never thought that the Holocaust had any impact on me. It was something that was my parents' story, had nothing to do with me. In fact, when my father would be talking about the Holocaust, and he was the kind of survivor who constantly talked about, and I would sometimes even leave the room because I did not want to hear anymore. It was enough. But I did want to go to Poland, and that first trip to Poland in 1994 was very traumatic, very emotional. And then that was 94. 91, my father passed away, and 93, my mother had passed away. And so when I came back from Poland and I got over the initial emotional emotions of that trip, which took quite a while, I decided that, well, I didn't really decide. I had to do something. It was something that was inside me, and I started getting involved with the Holocaust Museum, and I wanted to become a docent. That's what I wanted to do at first. In fact, a friend of mine reminded me just recently that I never mentioned that I was a survivor at first. Most of my friends, they never knew that I was a survivor. And and then slowly, bit by bit, it was not a conscious decision. It was more a need that first I started talking about my trip to Poland, and then it became a little bit more, and I started talking. The first few times I talked were quite emotional, and I would sometimes have to stop and gather my composure again. But eventually, I guess it got easier, and it was good for me because it got it out of my system, so to say. And I really think, and in a way I feel, because I am one of the younger survivors, the older survivors, like I said before, are dying out, unfortunately. And so I feel it is really my duty to bear witness, because there are very few survivors who are younger than I am, and some who are younger. Many of them don't know their story because their parents did not survive. So I'm one of the last ones that can talk.
Okay, I love it. I'm just going to put it here over just here a little bit. Okay. Okay, that's good. Now, tell me about, being that you are one of the youngest survivors. Where do you get your passion?
Well, it's basically to bear witness, to make people realize that to know that this happened, to make the younger generation aware of what happened. I also am very much involved. I started a child survivor group here in St. Louis, and I'm very much involved trying to start a second and third generation group, because I feel it's so important that once we are gone, the younger generations carry on and remember, and that it doesn't just disappear. Because, like somebody said, the Holocaust deniers, they are there, and there's not going to be nobody will be able to speak for us and counteract them once our generation is gone.
Okay, good. So now let's start with today. Coming in and talking to these group of children. What does that do for you? How do you feel coming in and speaking, and then after you leave?
Well, I've been doing this for several years now, so it's just something that almost sometimes feels like a routine. I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent. I don't have the stomach cramps anymore I used to have. I usually do not choke up anymore. I do sometimes still get goosebumps when some of the stories that I tell, especially when I tell about the man who told us that Lech Walesa was a traitor because he was selling Poland to the Jews. I still get goosebumps when I talk about that. But it has, it has become more routine, and sometimes I'm not sure that's good, but it's just the nature of talking, and after a while you just do it almost automatically. Of course, you never know what questions come up. Sometimes some questions today there were not too many questions, but sometimes I remember one little girl, I think she was very young, they were, I think, sixth graders or even younger, all of a sudden wanted to know the difference between Judaism and Christianity. And when I told her that the main difference was that we did not believe that Jesus was a Messiah, she perked up and said, "Does that mean you don't celebrate Christmas?" Which I thought was amazing, because a lot of adults don't realize that. So you never know what's going to come out of other children. And I think I can relate to the younger children because of my age at that time. And I like to, time permitting, I like to involve them by asking them questions. And some of the questions I ask are really silly questions, like you heard me today. Because I don't want them, I try not to get them fall asleep. So I try to get them involved, and sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't, it depends.
Okay, but what is your earliest memory?
My earliest memory is probably in Warsaw, with the bombs falling during the Warsaw Uprising, playing in the garden, and I was so excited when I saw that there is a garden near the house in Warsaw, because I do remember playing in the garden. Some memories, I don't know whether they're real or whether they were implanted. I had a very strange dream a while ago where I dreamt of a crib, like an old-fashioned crib, like they don't have those anymore. They were like, I don't know, steel, but aluminum or whatever they were. They're not wood. And it was standing in front of a window, and it just sort of felt, I know that place, I do not consciously remember, but it just sort of felt that the place that I've known. It was very, very strange. So I was once told by a psychiatrist who deals with traumatized children, that even though I was so young, it's still there, and it can come out. And so sometimes I wonder, because I have had a lot of dreams about places that I don't remember consciously, but that I feel familiar. In my dream, I know the place. So sometimes it's not really clear. On the other hand, it seems that some of the things I should remember very well, I don't, like after the war in Poland, when I was 5, 6, and 7. I do remember some things, but a lot of things I don't remember. I know when my book, And Life is Changed Forever, came out, I got a call from a lady who claimed that she knew me in Frankfurt. So at that time I was already a teenager, and I do not remember her. And yet she tells me all the things about what we did together, and we did this and that together, and everything that she said makes sense. I did all these things, and I just cannot remember her. So memory is something that's been very fascinating to me, because I really don't know at what point what I should remember, or well, it's not should is the wrong word, but it seems to be like sketchy, like fragments, and trying to put those things together.
Well, your parents did a really good job. You were lucky. You were with your family.
With my mother.
Did you feel? Did you discuss the Holocaust with them?
Well, my father was the kind of person that always had to talk about the Holocaust. As far as I was concerned, when I was growing up, I never did discuss the Holocaust with them. First of all, like I said before, I really felt I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Then later on, after my dad died, I tried to talk to my mother a couple of times, but my mother really did not like to talk about it. It was very painful for her. And whenever we did talk, she then had nightmares for several nights afterwards. So it was very touch and go, and I really was very afraid to talk to her. I did manage to ask her to make a tape, which she did. She made about a 30, 45-minute tape. And now my father has an extensive oral history on tape, so I have that. But the only thing that I remember my parents, especially my mother, telling me all the time was that I was snatched from Hitler's hands. Not the word hands, was the grasp, and that I deserve a good life because I was a child of the war, and she was extremely worried about my health, overly so. Thinking back, every time I complained about something, I was deathly ill, and but these were things that. And then on the other hand, I was also told that I couldn't remember. I was so lucky I couldn't remember anything because I was so young. So I was never really taken seriously as a survivor, even by my parents. And by the way, this is one of the things that is very common among child survivors, that because many of us were young, even some that were a little older than I, people felt, you were a child, you don't remember, it didn't affect you. And so a lot of child survivors did not speak until I would say the last 10, 15 years because of that. Because we were just told, you were a child, what do you know?
And how do you feel about that? Because you know you were changed.
Oh, sure. I felt very left out, ignored. In fact, I had a former director of the Holocaust Museum tell me that I was not a survivor because I had no personal memories, and that person would not allow me to speak. I felt very left out. I felt very, didn't know where I belonged. And I remember I tried to join a group, and I did not know which group I belonged. I tried to first join a second generation group, and that did not work. That was not me. And there was a need inside me to find people like me. And when I found out that there was a hidden child, a national hidden child organization, I was just like, oh my God, there are other people like that. And that's when I decided that I'd like to try to organize a group here in St. Louis. And to my great delight, our first meeting was in the spring of 1999. There were 5 people, and we all had the same feelings. Like, all the survivors did not want to hear from us. They kept telling us that we did not know because we were too young. What did we know? What did we remember? and every single member, as we're about 26 members now, every single member that joins us, the first thing out of their mouth is, "I'm not sure I belong to this group." And we keep telling them, yes, you do belong. If you feel you belong, you belong. And so it was just like a need to find people with the same feelings of being left out and not being recognized.
Okay, so what is the message that you would like to teach the children that you speak to here? From your experience, what do you, after you speak with them, what do you want them to walk out of here knowing and feeling?
Well, I guess it depends what group it is. If it's a Jewish group, I hope that they will pass on the legacy, and like I talked to the Schechter students, and my message to them was that they should treasure Judaism and not give Hitler a post-mortem victory, to treasure Judaism and carry on the traditions. For the non-Jewish groups, I hope that they will to broaden their horizon, to teach them that there are people in this world who are capable of unbelievable, horrible things to other people, to be aware and to be aware and conscious of it, and not to be a bystander. When I'm a docent, when I lead groups through the museum, I always tell the students I want them to remember three things. But just to go back, one thing that I also want to make sure is that they know what Judaism is, because a lot of students had no idea what a Jew is, especially some groups that come from outside in the small towns in Missouri. They've never met a Jew. They don't know what is a Jew. And but when I'm a docent, there are basically three things I want them to remember. Number one is if a leader tells you, listen to what your leaders tell you, and when you go to the voting booth, vote, and listen what they have to say, stay informed, because Hitler said everything he was going to do, and people did not believe him. Believe them. The second thing is that the Holocaust really stands out, unfortunately, in history, because it changed the world. Nobody before Auschwitz, nobody would have believed. Nobody did believe that such things were possible. And the thing is that once something is possible, it can happen again. And another thing I want them to remember, actually there are four things, I want to remember is that if they ever hear somebody deny the Holocaust happened, they should remember that during the Nuremberg trials, when the Nazis were, big shots were fighting for their lives, none of them ever denied that it happened. Their only line of defense was that they just followed orders. But none of them, not a single one, denied that the concentration camps and the murder took place. And now there was another thing, and it just sort of, I'm having a senior moment right now.
Talk about Judaism, about
there was the
believe if someone says it's going to happen, your leaders.
Oh, okay. The idea that there were good people. I make a big emphasis that there were some very good people who put their lives on the line to help, and unfortunately they were not enough. But they were there. There were thousands of ordinary men and women who helped, and who had made a choice of not being bystanders, and how important it is that every single person can make a difference.
Okay, tell me that last bit one more time.
That there were thousands of ordinary men and women who helped, who took in Jewish children, who put their lives on the line to help, and that every single person makes a difference. It can make a difference. And to not to be a bystander, but to do what you think is right, and not necessarily always follow the crowd, and do what you think is right. And even though there were thousands of people who helped, there were not enough of them.
So is this the family that helped you? Do you feel that you and your mom and dad survived because of that family, that farm, in the farm?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. If they had not taken us in, and at this point in my life, I really don't care whether they really knew or not that we were Jews. They did help us. I don't know, because they were not the first place where we stopped. We had stopped at some other places, and not everybody was willing to take people in, whether they were Jews or non-Jews. So they were very, very good and generous people. I mean, food was very, very scarce. Janina was telling me when I was there in '05, they had a quota. They had to deliver a certain percentage of what they grew and what they, whether it was eggs or wheat or whatever they had, to the Germans. And every farmer was told how much they had to deliver. And food was very scarce. And I actually was treated extremely well by them. My mother was telling me all the time, I was like the little mascot. I was 4 years old, and if there was an egg available, Felicia got the egg. And the first milk from the cow, which was supposed to be the best, because today people would argue that, but it was supposed to be the best thing that went to me, because they tried to make my life as good and as happy as possible. So there's no doubt in my mind that they were very good people, and whether they knew or not at this point, I really don't care.
Did your mom and dad work on the farm with them?
Oh yes, my father worked in the field with the men, and that's how they. If they did find out that we were Jews, he was with the men all the time, and don't forget they were not as husband and wife, because they had two different sets of papers, and so in fact the story goes that the farmer wanted his older daughter to marry my dad. He kept telling my dad, "Well, what's wrong with my daughter? She's a hard-working girl, and so my father, without insulting them, had to find reasons why he was not going to get married. And when my mother helped in the kitchen with the women, oh yes, even I was put to work. I remember you asked me about memories. One of my memories is, and I did confirm that with them when I was on the farm. I was given the job to watch the cow. They had one cow, and I was told that not to let the cow go into the field where the corn was growing. And I was 3-4 years old, and I was little, and he was this big cow. And I remember one day the cow started walking towards the field, towards the cornfield and a wheat field, whatever it was, and I had no idea how to stop that cow. So I kept hitting it. Of course, the more I hit it, the more it went to the field. And I finally just ran crying into the farmhouse saying, I don't know what to do. And when I was the first time in Poland, I told them that story, and they remembered that. They said, yes, that's true, that did happen.
That's a great story. All right, let's go back and start at the beginning when you were talking about, let's see, let's start at, where do I go here? What are your thoughts about losing your grandparents? So you survived with your mom and your mother and father, but you really didn't have any aunts, uncles, cousins.
Well, I've been doing some writing in the last several years, and I started writing seriously writing after my first trip to Poland, because that was my way it was therapy for me. And one thing that I wrote that I think was been published in the Jewish the Brodsky Library, the what's it called, Harvest, Jewish Harvest, that I wish very often, and this is true, I really wish that I sometimes could be hypnotized and go back in time. And that picture I have of my grandparents that I showed, I heard so much about this grandfather of mine, what a wonderful man he was. And that's somehow I would just love to be able to just, if you only for a few minutes, talk to him. And I was the first and only grandchild, and I was told by my parents how he would come every day as long as it was still safe for him to walk, because he had a beard. After a while, it was not safe for him to be out. And he would come every day and play with me, and one of his biggest joy was to be able to take me for a walk and have me all to himself. I remember that I was about 10 or 11 years old when I heard some of my friends talk about grandparents. And I remember being like, grandparents? What's that? I didn't know anybody had grandparents. I mean, it was a foreign idea to me. And so, and same thing with aunts, uncles. And in fact, that picture that I showed, I had that picture. I was trying to make some duplicates, and the lady asked, "Is that you in the picture?" And I said, "No, that's my." I always said, "She's my father's sister," and all of a sudden hit me. Wait a minute! She's not only my father's sister; she's my aunt. You know, and it's like a very interesting and different feeling, because I never used. We don't have any families. And my husband comes from a very large family, but I just have my brother, who was born after the war, and so it's different.
Good way of putting it. So these pictures mean an awful lot to you that you do have.
Yes, absolutely. And I wish I had a picture of my maternal grandfather, but actually I never complain, because I was extremely lucky to have what I have. I know I have a friend who doesn't have a picture doesn't know what her mother looked like. And so, you know, I have no reason to complain, and I am always extremely grateful for everything that's going on. And I never get upset for getting older.
No, me too. I'll take it. So when you go back to the memories of being raised Roman Catholic, does that come out in any form?
I actually remember having one or two very strange experiences. I remember being in the synagogue one Shabbos morning, and I could have sworn that I smelled incense. And that was shortly after I had started writing, so maybe it was just it was only imagination. There's no incense in the synagogue, but I really got scared. It was a very frightening experience, because oh my God, what's happening? Another time, and I had this. During the time when there was a lot of talk about what's his name, the movie, The Passion, where we talked a lot about the historical events. I was all of a sudden I had this vision in me of seeing a statue of Jesus, and I could describe it to you. It was just like so vivid. It must have been something that I've seen in my youth, because I could describe him. If I could draw, if I could paint it. And it was just really very eerie. But people have asked me that question so many times, you know, how did you feel all of a sudden finding out that you're Jewish? And I do remember going to church, and I remember loving going to church. And I remember, and my mother confirmed that is true, I would always go to the front because I wanted to be front and center. I wanted to see the priest. Didn't want to miss anything. And yet, when I found out that I was Jewish, it just seems like there was something in me that just accepted it. That it was just, I am a strong believer there's such thing as a Jewish soul, because it feels like I came home. I did not have any feeling of being cheated or being becoming somebody else. In fact, I think it was harder for me to accept that he was my father than it was for me to accept that I was Jewish. I know that there are other child survivors who were raised Catholic who had a very, very hard time. And I know there's one person who writes how she, after her bat mitzvah, went to confession and confessed to the priest because they feel comfort in church. I've never felt that way. For some reason or other that I cannot explain. I have no explanation for it. There's one memory that I have. They were still in Poland, and I must have been 5, 6 years, probably around 6 years old. And my mother was very sick after the war, after my brother was born. So I had a nanny, and or an au pair, whatever you want to call it. And she prepared for Christmas like a little thing for my parents. I should perform for my parents. And she dressed me up as an angel with wings and a halo and a whole bit. And I was supposed to recite something. I don't remember what I was supposed to recite, but what I do remember is that I just, in the middle of this, I was, she had rehearsed with me and rehearsed, and then when I was actually performing in front of my parents, in the middle of it, I broke out crying and couldn't finish and ran to my mother. And I remember my mother turning to my father and saying, "You would think the child knows." I had no idea what she meant by that, but I remember that scene. It's just, and it's not a dream. I do remember that. So, I don't know. It seemed like I sort of went to, that Judaism was in my blood, so to say.
Yeah, childhood intuition.
Right.
Did they change your name? Did you keep the same name throughout?
Well, Felicia was always my name, my first name. My last name is a different story, because originally it was Lederberger. Then with my mother it was Schlusacek. And then when my mother supposedly married this man was Białecki, and my brother is still Bialecki. And because in order to leave Poland, my father had to get passports, and so he had to officially change his name to Bialecki. And there was always hope that they would go back to Lederberger, but I don't think that's going to happen.
So what did it feel like to you when you did see the sister? She was 16 at the farm.
Right.
Tell me about seeing her.
Well, I really didn't have. I didn't have any recollection of her. I really don't remember her. I just remember being on the farm, and it's amazing how little I remember of that time, because they kept telling me all kinds of things that there was a cat there who I loved and who I kept picking up, and I was told not to because she was going to scratch me. I just don't remember.
Okay, that's fine. How about when you were in Warsaw? You mentioned that you got on a train, but there was a story there that you didn't have time to tell. You lived in Warsaw for a year, and then after the uprising, they were sending everyone out.
Right.
And how did you end up on this train?
Well, we were in this transit camp, Pruszków. In Pruszków, it's a city, Pruszków. And we were there as Warsaw inhabitants, not as Jews. Although I found out later that there were quite a few Jews there that were caught in that dragnet. But the Germans were not really looking for Jews unless it was pointed out to them. And the Germans was taking people for slave labor to Germany. Some of them were sent to Auschwitz. And apparently they said that women with children 2 and under could leave. And even though I was 4, I was quite short. And like I often tell the kids, sometimes it's good to be short. My mother managed to tell the guard. She claimed I was 2, and there was a lot of commotion going on, and he let us go. Well, the men and women, by the way, were separated. And my father claimed that he was ill. He said he had dysentery, and he convinced one of the doctors that he was sick. And he was put in a field hospital in a tent on a cot. And he tells the story how he saw this German officer walk in with the doctor saying, well, let's see if we have any fakers here. And he went from cot to cot and actually stopped in front of my father and pointed to my father and said, well, you can see this man is really sick. And my father, to his dying day, did not know what happened. The only thing he can figure is that he was so scared that he must have turned green or pale or something, because the man just, and then they were going to be taken to a hospital, but my father didn't believe they were actually going to be taken to a hospital, and he was able to sneak out. And I really don't know how, but what happened, which I was not able to tell, my mother and I, when my mother was let go, she decided that she was going to try to get away, and she was waited for this train. And when my father sneaked out, he had the same thought, and they actually ended up on the same train, and were reunited on the train, which was another miraculous event actually, because they could have lost sight of each other for a very, very long time.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. Also, when he snuck out of the ghetto, he got you. It's amazing. Did he have money to get you the forged documents? My
father somehow always managed to have money, in his oral history on tape, I don't know how. All I know is that he was a very resourceful person, extremely resourceful. Being in the jewelry business, he was able to. My father always had hiding places in his suits, in his jackets, and his pants. And one time, he says, as he was, in fact, when he was taken to this camp in Prushkov, he says they were searching us, but they never found my hiding places. And somehow he had American dollars. I have no idea where he got. He had $100 bills. I have no idea how he got them. And he had someone, some lady who lived in town near the farm, I don't know how my father found her, but she had been married to a Jewish man, and she helped my father exchange his dollars for Polish zlotys. And I don't know. I really don't know how he did it, but somehow he always managed to. I was never hungry. He always managed to have food for us. Somehow he was just amazing the way he did this. I don't know how, but he did it.
So he got the forged documents for you,
right,
your mother.
Right.
And then
he got those through the underground. And by the way, I never realized until a few years ago how difficult it was to get those papers. I sort of always took it for granted because my father said, well, I got the papers. And I said, all right, you got the papers. But I read, I've been reading quite a lot about the Holocaust, and it was very, very difficult to get good ones, because you could get some real, some that were not that good, and of course it was dangerous because if you were found with having forged papers, there was a death sentence, and as far as he himself got papers also. Actually, at the time that he got those papers from my mother, he got a set of papers for himself also, which he hid, and they were eaten up by rats. He hid them in some place, and when we went to get them, they were all they were in shreds. And so the papers that he got were actually given to him somehow for somebody else. Somebody had sent those papers under Bielecki for another man, and when my father tried to give it to him, he said, "I don't speak Polish. I was raised in Germany. This is ridiculous for me to have Polish papers. You keep them because I cannot use them." And that's how my father had those Bielecki papers. That's how the name Bielecki became part of our family.
Wow, that's an incredible story. So it really is about luck, isn't it?
Yes. Well, you can call it luck. You can sometimes I say, is it luck? Is it somebody watching over us? I don't know, but absolutely. And you know, there has been a lot of talk and a lot of written about whether resourceful people had more chance to survive than people who were more, I would say less resourceful, but not as active or more passive. And you know, there is absolutely no evidence, because there were books written. There is one book written called Against All Odds. Somebody tried to find out, you know, whether resourceful people had the more chances of survival, and basically what they found out is that there was no rule. Whether sometimes not acting was the right thing, sometimes acting was the right thing. Like when we were in Warsaw in 1944, Hungary was still a safe place for Jews, and there were other people. There were a lot of Jews living in Warsaw with false papers, and they did know each other. I mean, many of them, not all of them, but they did know each other, and they got together from time to get information, because information was hard to get. You didn't have television, you didn't have internet, you didn't have telephones, you didn't have radios even, because they were taken by the Germans. And my father and mother were telling how at one point a group wanted to go to Hungary, decided that they were going to go to Hungary because it was safer in Hungary, and my father refused to go. He said, "I'm not going. I've got a good apartment here. I feel safe here. I'm not going." And they tried to talk him into going. My mother wanted to go, and my father refused, and the whole group was caught. So, and they were killed. So sometimes not acting was the right thing, but who knew whether what was the right thing to do? You know, in hindsight, we can say, well, you know, you always have 20/20 vision.
Tell me how hard it was for you when you found out that this man was really your father.
I had a hard time with that. I don't know why. In fact, for years, I would think that I was adopted. And I actually remember the moment that I came to the realization he was my father, that I really accepted the fact, was because I remember I was a teenager then, and I was combing my hair one morning, and I looked myself in the mirror, and I said, "Wait a minute. You look at his face, you look at your face. That's one face. They must be telling the truth. You must be his daughter." And I was never really very close to my father. We never really had that close relationship. Now, whether this was because of that, or maybe maybe that was the reason that I never that it was hard for me to accept the fact, I don't know. But that was also one thing that I do not remember, but my mother told that I was really yearning for my missing father. And after the war, still in Poland, when the prisoners of war were coming back, I would urge my mother to come and see maybe my father would be coming back. So I had this yearning for this missing father, and it was hard for me to sort of put this person in this imaginary father's place.
So did you ever come around? Did you after your realization when you were a teenager, were you able to get closer to him?
I don't think I was ever really close to him. Unfortunately, a lot of his great things that he did, I did not really come to really understand until it was too late. Unfortunately, after he passed away, thinking back, some of the things I regret not having been able to talk to him about, but by that time it was too late. And
well, and this book that you say you contributed to that said that everything changed. So in reality, you and your mother and father had this idyllic, perfect life. He was a jeweler, and so Hitler and the Nazis took everything away. And so even, who knows what would have been if you had known he was your father all along.
I don't know. Now the thing is also to forget, my father really had to start from scratch twice within 2 years. He started from scratch in 1945 when he literally dug up instruments in a bombed out jewelry store, watchmaker store, and opened up a store. My father figured that people after the war was over wanted to go back to work, and in order to go back to work they needed two things. They needed glasses and they needed a watch. And being a watchmaker, he decided to open up that he was going to repair their watches, and he hired an optometrist and had him fit people with glasses. And he did extremely well. He was considered a wealthy man in Poland after the war, between 45 and 47 when we left. And that's why the communists got on his back, because he was a big capitalist. And so he had to leave everything behind a second time and start from scratch again in Belgium. And to make matters worse, before we left Poland, he exchanged a lot of cash, Polish zlotys, for English pounds. And when he came to Belgium, he found out that those were forged. There was forged English pounds. The Germans had flooded the market with forged dollars and English pounds. And he, whether that person knowingly sold my father that, or whether that person, whoever sold it to him, did not know, I don't know. But he really had to start all over again from scratch for the second time in 2 years.
And how did you end up in Belgium?
My father managed to bribe a Belgish vice consul to give him a visa. And the reason for Belgium was he had a distant cousin in Brussels. And I have no idea how he found him, how he knew he was there. And actually the goal was to go to either the United States or South America. Belgium, however, gave us asylum, political asylum, but Belgium did not allow foreigners to work. And so we were waiting for our visa to come to the United States. And in the meantime, my father had to make a living. So he would, for the first, from 47 to 51, he commuted from Brussels to Germany and dealt doing business. And because my mother refused to move to Germany. She refused to raise her children in Germany. And by 1951, it just became too much. And so my mother gave in and we moved to Germany. And actually in 1956, our visa to the United States did come through. And we did come to the States thinking that we would move here permanently. But at that time, my father just could not start all over again. He did not know the language. And even though he just couldn't do it anymore. So they went back to Germany. I always wanted to come to the States, but it turned out the States came to me.
So you got married and ended up coming here in 1963. Right. When did your parents come over?
My parents didn't come here till 1989, I believe it was. My father by that time was quite ill. And my parents just could not be alone anymore. And so my brother and I brought both my parents here to St. Louis. They just needed to be with family.
One other question that I have is when you were hiding, did you hide in the attic? Because you said the apartment that you were in the ghetto had the attic, but since both your parents worked and you were the only child, you didn't have to hide there, right? No. Okay. And why do you think that in the Judenrat that they brought your father when you were saying that someone in the Jewish council? Why did they bring you in?
Well, they had family members in that hiding place, and they were afraid that once we were being taken away, that hiding place would be discovered.
Oh, because you weren't living there anymore. So it was just circumstance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So
it's all a matter. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So explain that to me.
Okay. In other words, because of this hiding place, and because one member of the Jewish Council, or Judenrat, had, I believe it was a mother-in-law or a sister or a couple of members of his family in that hiding place. He was afraid that once we were taken away, that hiding place would be discovered because the Germans would go in and try to find valuables, and they would have discovered that hiding place, and all these people would have been killed. And so he was really desperate to try to save his family. And a lot of people, he was not the only one who asked the commander to get the people out of the transport, because, as my father says, many of the Germans had their own personal Jewish person that they would sort of favor, not because they liked them, but because they would get things from them. Like they would, if the guy was a tailor, the Germans would have him sew uniforms or suits for them or for their wives. If they were shoemakers, they would make shoes for them to order. And so if, for example, a shoemaker would be taken away and the shoes were not finished, he wanted those shoes finished. So that shoemaker needed to be saved until the shoes were finished. And so there were other people who were requesting certain people to be let go. And this man, whoever he was, told the commander that my father was a member of the Jewish Council, which was not the case, and that he was a man that had the quality of keeping things, having things run smoothly. And if it's one thing the Germans like, it's things to run smoothly. So, you know, maybe he was just in a good mood or whatever, I really don't know. But it worked.
I love that story. Okay, is there anything else that you want to tell me?
Just basically that I wanted to thank you for doing this. And I really think it's important, and I really think that it's important for the world to know what happened, and hopefully to learn from it. I don't know if they have, but there's always hope. And that's basically, you know, you asked me before why I'm doing this. Sometimes I wonder, am I doing this for nothing? You know, is there no hope? But maybe if we just touch one or two or three people, something will come out of it. You know, there's also a lot of, for many years I went through this survivor guilt. Why did I survive? Why 1.5 million children were killed? What did I do? What do I have to do in order to deserve to be alive? I don't think I have an answer for that. My husband gave me one that I sort of cling to. He said, you don't know that. Maybe your children or grandchildren, great-grandchildren will do something that is something good for humanity. So maybe you're just like an instrument. You have no way of knowing. So I hope he's right. That's all.
Oh, I love that. That's so right, because my next question was going to be, what about your children and grandchildren? And you answered it for me, so. Okay, I think we're good. That's fantastic. Yeah,
Good.
thanks, Felicia.
The tape